Throughout time, people across the world told each other tales of how they came to be, of heroes and monsters, romance and tragedy, death and rebirth. Mythology helped shape the ancient world, explaining the unexplainable. This is Mythology Unleashed. Humanity has no shortage of monsters and demons lurking in mythology and folklore, created from the dark recesses of imagination and superstition. Some monsters are rather unique to their respective mythologies, such as the Wendigo of Anishinaabe folklore, or the Minotaur of Greek mythology. However, some legends have a blood-curdling way of making their way into the nightmares of people across countless cultures. Such is the case with vampires. Horror fiction of the late 19th century into the modern day portrays vampires as attractive, human-like beings who sleep during the day away from the sunlight and arise at night, prowling urban areas for human victims. When their quarry is seized upon, they bite into their prey's neck with sharp, cruel fangs, draining them of their blood until not a drop is left, effectively killing them. A familiar and chilling tale in horror stories and scary movies. But the vampires of mythology are strikingly different from modern-day Hollywood. As with dragons and giants, nearly every culture on Earth has a blood-sucking being lurking in its folklore, dating back thousands of years. Blood drinking and similar activities were attributed to demons or spirits who would dine on human flesh and blood. Even the Christian devil was considered synonymous with the vampire. Almost every culture in the world associated blood drinking with some kind of revenant or demon, or in some cases a deity. In Greek mythology, the monstrous Lamia was said to attack children during the night, drinking their blood before devouring the remains. Chinese mythology tells of the Chongxi, the hopping vampire, which resembles a corpse stricken with rigor mortis, dressed in Mandarin attire with arms stretched out, who drains its victims not only of their blood, but their very chi, or life force. In Akan mythology of Ghana and Togo lurks the Asanbosam, or Sansabosam, bat-like humanoids who feed on the blood of people and animals who stray into their territory. Philippine mythology has the Manananggal, another bat-like humanoid creature that separates from its lower half and flies through the night on large, bat-like wings, searching for pregnant women to suck out their blood, as well as unborn fetuses. The Daragdua of Irish mythology appears as a beautiful young woman who seduces men before killing them and drinking their blood. Folktales from Central and South America have El Chupacabras, near alien-looking monsters that prowl ranches for the blood of livestock. Slavic mythology has the Striga, a reanimated corpse that flies through the night and consumes the blood and entrails of the living. Folklore from Aboriginal Australia has the Yaramayahu, a small, red-furred creature who ambushes unsuspecting people and strategically drains their blood through suctions on their fingers and toes. These few examples of vampiric monsters are but a taste of the many legends to have been told throughout the centuries. So diverse are they in their appearance and their characteristics, that to name a collection of definitive traits would be next to impossible. However, the sole trait that unites them all is their consumption of human and animal blood. The creatures we identify with vampires today are rooted almost exclusively in early 18th century southeastern Europe, when oral traditions of many ethnic groups of the region were recorded and published, and when superstition ruled over reason. In most cases, vampires were revenants of evil beings, suicide victims, or witches, yet may also be created by a malevolent spirit possessing a corpse, by being bitten by a vampire, or by drinking vampiric blood. Belief in vampires became so pervasive in Europe that in some areas it caused mass hysteria and even public executions of people believed to be vampires. A multitude of different theories have arisen to explain where the vampire legends and subsequent hysteria may have begun, particularly centered around misunderstanding of how bodies decompose. As a corpse's skin decomposes and shrinks, its teeth and fingernails can appear to have grown longer, appearing as fangs or claws to the superstitious. As internal organs break down, a dark purge fluid can leak out of the nose and mouth. Those unfamiliar with this process could interpret this fluid to be blood, and suspect that the corpse had been drinking it from the living. But bloody corpses with long hair and nails were not the only cause for suspicion. During the late Middle Ages, Europe had been stricken with bouts of the Black Death, bubonic plague that ravaged the continent. Before people understood how certain disease spread, they sometimes imagined vampires and other demons were behind the unseen forces slowly ravaging their communities. Trying to kill vampires, or prevent them from feeding, was a way for people to feel as though they had some control over disease. And so came various practices or rituals to keep vampires away, and the dead from returning as one of them. Some methods included severing the head from the body, even turning it around, severing limbs, placing a brick in the mouth, placing iron needles in the heart, or burying the corpse with a sickle over its throat. Fear of vampires fueled the superstitious folk, leading to methods of protection against them, and if need be, to kill them. Some legends, and much of common horror fiction for that matter, claim that vampires cannot abide sunlight, either weakening them severely, or burning them to a pile of dust. Being demonic and unholy in nature, vampires could be repelled by holy relics and symbols. The cross could hold them at bay, biblical scripture read aloud would cause them pain, and contact with holy water or holy wafers would burn their flesh. In addition, they are said to be unable to walk on hallowed ground or cross running water. Garlic and other aromatic plants were said to keep vampires away, stemming from garlic's use in folk medicine. In order to kill a vampire, one must drive a stake through their heart, behead them, or burn them, though some traditions may call for any combination of the three. It is also said that weapons of iron or silver, both considered pure metals blessed by heaven, are rather effective against the undead. With these superstitions held as firm belief, the Western world became flooded with stories of people dying and allegedly rising from the grave. Stories of supposed hunters killing suspected vampires, and the exhuming and desecration of corpses believed to be cursed. But vampire lore would soon change forever with the publications of Gothic Romantic European literature of the 18th and 19th centuries, about the time vampire hysteria was peaking in Europe. Vampiric figures appeared in 18th century poetry, such as Heinrich August Ossenfelder's Der Vampir, about a seemingly vampiric narrator who seduces an innocent maiden. The first prose vampire story published in English is believed to be John Polidori's The Vampire in 1819, about a mysterious aristocrat named Lord Ruthven, who seduces young women, only to drain them of their blood and vanish without a trace. In 1872 came the novella Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, about a young woman who is preyed upon by a female vampire. In 1897, Irish author Bram Stoker released the consummate vampire tale, Dracula, the story of a 400-year-old vampiric count of Transylvania, loosely based upon old vampire legends and the historical Vlad Tepes III, better known as Vlad the Impaler. From Bram Stoker, particularly through his character of Professor Abraham Van Helsing, we received the solidified traits, powers, and weaknesses that would come to define the vampire in Western popular culture. Vampires were cemented as people who had died and later rose from the grave, and continued to live their undead life through the consumption of human blood. They became almost fully nocturnal, sleeping during the day in coffins, often filled with the soil of their homeland. They could not cross running water, enter a home without spoken permission, cast a natural shadow or a reflection in mirrors. They could not appear on film or withstand the presence of garlic. Vampires were given the powers of superhuman strength and speed, heightened senses, hypnotic capabilities, the ability to defy gravity, and the power to shapeshift into bats, wolves, rodents, or even mist. And with these powers came well-established weaknesses of sunlight, fire, holy relics, and they could be killed by decapitation and by a stake driven through the heart. But Dracula not only re-established the vampire's inherent attributes spoken of in mythology, but their overall appearance and disposition as well. Rather than the walking corpse and demonic-looking creature that they were portrayed as in mythology, vampires would become much more human-looking, and would almost always be aesthetically very attractive, alluring to their would-be victims. Or at the very least, would come across as much more unassuming, perhaps allowing them to approach prey more easily. Additionally, they would develop individual personality traits that their folklore counterparts, and many mythical monsters in general, would lack. Whereas the vampires of Eastern European folklore were mindless and rather animal-like, Count Dracula was intelligent, charming, with impeccable manners and good breeding, and he was more than capable of showing love, remorse, pleasure, hate, vengeance, and even fear. As time would go on, the vampire would gradually evolve in literature, movies, comic books, and games. And with each new iteration of the vampire, something new would be brought to the table. In Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles, we see a more personal side to the vampires, with the tragic protagonist Louis shown constantly at odds with his thirst for blood and holding on to what remains of his humanity. In the Underworld and Blade franchises, we see vampires, both good and evil, in more action-based roles, even experimenting with ideas of characters who are half vampire and half human, or even half vampire and half werewolf. The comic book and movie 30 Days of Night brought vampires back to their mythological roots of being terrifying killing machines, birthed by infection and driven by bloodlust. There are countless more works of fiction centered around vampires, and though they all may differ in appearance, personality, even power and weakness, all owe their thanks to the vampire legends of old. The mythology surrounding vampires is truly a fascinating one, and one that is spread far across the world. Though the vampire may come in many shapes and sizes, the terror and subsequent thrill that ekes from their legend has intrigued the minds of people for countless generations. From ancient mythology, to medieval superstition, to the printed page and the silver screen, vampires have arguably become the most popular monster in the horror genre, and one of the most enduring monsters ever to spring forth from mythology. There are countless monsters haunting the stories of mythology and the nightmares of people all across the world. Yet there are some that manage to slink their way into nearly every culture on the planet. Such is the case for the vampire. A vampire is a creature that exists by feeding off of the blood and other fluids of other creatures, whether they be human or animal. Though the term vampire will often lead to mental images of figures such as Dracula from Bram Stoker's novella, physically attractive or otherwise unassuming people who sprout pronounced canines and bite into the necks of their victims, the truth is that vampires come in a variety of different forms all throughout the world. This program will discuss a selection of the most famous and most horrifying vampires of mythology. Our first vampire is the classic Eastern European iteration, perhaps the strongest influence upon modern Western vampire fiction. The vampires of Eastern Europe were often depicted as being the revenants of deceased witches, suicide victims, and people who were wicked in life, possessed by a demonic spirit, but may also be created by being bitten by a vampire, drinking vampiric blood, or any other method of dark magic. Though they had the appearance of humans, they were a hollow shell, a predatory beast void of humanity, driven only by an endless thirst for blood. They were said to possess uncanny strength, preternatural speed, and razor-sharp senses, useful tools when on the hunt for prey, overpowering their victims and biting into them with their razor-sharp teeth. Though they were efficient killers, they may be repelled by holy symbols such as the cross, biblical scripture, or by the scent of garlic, and were said to be unable to set foot on hallowed ground or cross running water. Physical contact with holy water, wafers, or relics were said to burn their very flesh like a corrosive acid. In order to kill them, they had to be beheaded, staked through the heart, or burned, or any combination of the three. And of course, as with many Eastern European nocturnal monsters, they could not abide sunlight, burning to ash as soon as the morning rays touched their flesh. Further east from Chinese mythology comes tales of the Jiangshi, the hopping vampire. Depicted in art as being clothed in traditional Mandarin attire, circa the Qing dynasty, the Jiangshi retain the pale flesh, soulless eyes, clawed fingers, and sharp teeth of Western vampires. But its arms were always outstretched, and its body stiff as a board, similar to a corpse in a state of rigor mortis. Being unable to properly move its joints, the Jiangshi was limited to a hopping locomotion, hence the nickname hopping vampire. According to Chinese tradition, there are several ways in which one becomes a jiangshi. When a person dies a violent death, such as by suicide or by murder, or is given an improper burial, their soul or life force is left in a state of unrest, resulting in a reanimation of the corpse. Other alleged ways a jiangshi is created includes a corpse being struck by lightning, or if an animal, namely a cat, steps or hops over a corpse. But what makes this vampire particularly scary is that not only would it feed on the blood of its victim, but it would absorb their very qi, and grow ever more powerful with each victim it would claim. Yet for however powerful a jiangshi may be, there are several ways to ward off or kill them. They may be held back or driven off entirely by showing them their reflection in a mirror, dousing them with a black dog's blood, urine, or vinegar, or by the sound of a rooster crowing. In addition to beheading or burning, like in Western vampire folklore, the jiangshi may be killed by items made from peach trees, or by nailing several jujube seeds into the acupuncture points on its back. Some of the most frightening vampires and monsters in general are found in African folklore. The Akan people of Ghana told stories of a vampiric monster called the Asan Bosom. Also known as the Sasabansum, this creature had various features that resembled a human's, but more than a few features that were closer to a bat, such as large eyes, razor-sharp teeth, supposedly composed of iron, a strong tail, and occasionally a massive pair of leathery wings. But most distinctly, its feet were gigantic and hook-shaped with massive iron claws, with which the beast would hang upside down like a real-life bat. Asan Bosom would lurk in the treetops and canopies in the remotest parts of the jungle, and stealthily hunt down those that would trespass into its territory, and drink their blood within a matter of moments. Though a frightening creature, the Asan Bosom has long been a cautionary demon, a boogeyman to frighten children out of wandering the forests after dark. In addition, it has acted as a dark lesson to teach younger generations to respect nature, one that has been taught for many centuries. But not all vampire legends are particularly ancient, as America has had more than its fair share in its comparatively short existence. One such case was the tale of Mercy Brown. In the late 1800s, in Exeter, Rhode Island, a case of tuberculosis had stricken the Brown family. The first to succumb to tuberculosis, or consumption as it was called, was Mercy's mother, Mary Eliza, followed by their eldest daughter, Mary Olive, in 1884. In 1891, Mercy and her brother Edwin would also go on to catch consumption, with Mercy succumbing to the illness in January of 1892 at the age of 19. Rumor began to circulate among the townsfolk. The family were no doubt the victims of vampires. Or perhaps one among them was one of the undead. After some prodding from the populace, Mercy's father, George Brown, gave permission to exhume the corpses of his wife and daughters on March 17, 1892. Though Mary Eliza and Mary Olive's bodies had decomposed to the point of skeletons, Mercy's was noticeably intact, perhaps due to the winter's cold staving off bacteria and other microorganisms, though that would not have occurred to the superstitious lot of the time. Upon closer inspection from the town's doctor, it appeared that Mercy still had liquid blood within her heart. The townsfolk took this all as a sign that Mercy was indeed a vampire, and must be dealt with accordingly. As superstition dictated, Mercy's heart and liver were burned, and the ashes were mixed with holy water to create a tonic that was given to the sick Edwin to drink, as an effort to resolve his illness and stop the influence of the vampire. 2 months later, Edwin Brown had died of the same illness that took the rest of his family, save for his father. Though Mercy was not a vampire in reality, that would not stop the spread of her story, or any supernatural embellishments that folklore is notorious for. But in the United States, New Orleans holds the record for vampire legends, and even vampire sightings. And one legend stands out among the rest. The most famous New Orleans vampire, Jacques Saint-Germain. According to the legend, Saint-Germain immigrated from France to New Orleans in 1902, where he earned a reputation for throwing lavish dinner parties for New Orleans' wealthy citizens. Bizarrely, however, he was never seen to dine with his guests. His wealth, his shadowy background, and his aloof and almost alien behavior, coupled with his gentlemanly charm, made him the subject of many rumors. One night, screams were heard coming from Saint-Germain's home, and a woman jumped from the second-story balcony of his house. The people coming to her rescue heard her raving that she had been attacked by Saint-Germain, and that he had bitten her on the neck. The woman was taken to the hospital, where she later died. When police searched Saint-Germain's home, they found bloodstains and wine bottles filled with human blood, but there was no sign of the man himself. To this day, Saint-Germain and other suspected vampires are said to lurk in the French Quarter, preying upon the unwary wandering the night. From Slavic mythology comes the winged demon known as the Striga. Often shown in a female form, and rarely in the form of a male, the Striga was said to be an ominous, large-headed bird with a human-like face, primate fingers curved into razor-sharp talons, grayish bat-like wings, yellowed eyes, and a long, voracious beak, which was used to drink the blood of its victims or feed on their bodies. Its breath was said to be toxic, easily ending the lives of its preferred victims, sleeping infants. A Striga was said to be created from people who were born with 2 hearts, 2 souls, and a double row of teeth. In Slavic belief, the Striga often died at a young age, but when one soul left the body, the other survived to begin its hunt. These accursed beasts were said to fly at night in the form of an owl, and attack nighttime travelers and people who had wandered off into the woods at night, sucking out their blood and eating their entrails. The creature could be recognized by a characteristic blue glow that surrounded its body at night, and their victims could be recognized by their left eye that always remained open in a dead stare. It was possible to defend against the Striga by hanging branches of hawthorn in the window, sprinkling the threshold with water, or giving the blood of a pig to drink. As with many dark vampiric creatures, the Striga could be killed when exposed to sunlight, or when its head was separated from its neck. Aboriginal Australian folklore tells of the Yaramayahu, a small vampire found within the Pacific forests of the continent. They are strange little monsters, like a blend of a frog and a man, covered in bright red fur, and standing about 4 feet high. Its largest features are its head, mouth, and stomach. They have no teeth in their mouth, and simply swallow their food whole, even prey as large as a grown man. The points of their fingers and the tips of their toes are cup-shaped, like the suckers of an octopus. Yaramayahus live mostly in thick, leafy trees, preferably wild fig trees where, rather than hunt for their food, they simply pounce upon a person, place their hands and feet upon the victim, and drain their blood. The Yaramayahu does not aim to drain all the blood from a body, and leaves a sufficient amount to keep the victim weakened, but alive. After a time, it swallows its prey into its mouth, head first. It will then rise and perform a dance until the prey is well inside its stomach. It will then drink copious amounts of water before falling asleep. When the creature awakes, it will vomit the remains of its most recent meal, and poke them and tickle them with a stick to ensure the person is not feigning death. Truly a bizarre ritual, but should the Yaramayahu fail to check the victim, a spirit of the wild fig tree would kill him by entering his ear, and causing a mumbling noise until the Yaramayahu is transformed into a clump of mushrooms. A person who is caught and swallowed by a Yaramayahu and survives has the potential to run away and live to tell the tale, made easier by the creature's awkward gait. However, it is important not to let a Yaramayahu swallow you multiple times. The second time a person is swallowed and regurgitated, they become shorter and entirely bald. By the third time, they shrink once more, and thick hair grows all over their body. After enough cycles of swallowing and vomiting, the person shall become a Yaramayahu themselves. Another vampiric creature from more recent times is the chupacabra, or chupacabras. A fascinating cryptid hailing from Puerto Rico and said to be seen throughout the Caribbean, the southwestern United States, and all the way to the southernmost reaches of Central America since the 1990s. Chupacabras were blamed for attacks on goats, sheep, and other domestic animals, leaving behind carcasses that were uneaten, yet were entirely drained of blood. Alleged witnesses in the South described a creature that stood upright and resembled a reptilian kangaroo, with huge red eyes and prominent fangs. While further north, Chupacabra would gain a more mammalian appearance, with alleged witnesses claiming that it looked like a large feral dog, also with burning red eyes and unearthly fangs. Some say that appearances of Chupacabra aligned with UFO sightings in the area, indicating the beast was alien in origin, while others believe that the Chupacabras were a secret military experiment gone wrong, and escaped from a lab and into the wild. Whatever the explanation may be, Chupacabras are an iconic variant of vampire, and among the world's most famous cryptids. Our final vampire comes from Irish folklore, a creature known as the Darach Dua, the red bloodsucker. The Darach Dua resembles a beautiful young woman who seduces men before killing them and draining them of their blood, very common for a vampire, and not unlike a succubus. According to the legend, a woman of Waterford, known throughout the countryside for her beauty, fell in love with a local peasant, but her father would not allow them to wed. Her father instead arranged for her to marry a wealthy man who abused her in every way possible. In time, her grief became too much, and she killed herself. She was buried near Strongbow's tree in Waterford, her abusive husband having already found someone new. But one night, she rose from her grave to seek revenge on her father and her husband, sucking their blood until they both dropped dead. The Daragdua is a frightening vampire whose legend reminds us all that the evil one creates will ultimately destroy them. These are but a handful of examples of the many varieties of vampire legends told over the centuries. Vampires haunt the mythologies and folklores of practically every culture across Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia, the Americas, and the Pacific Islands. They can vary greatly in appearance, with some looking otherworldly as monsters, while others can pass off as human beings. But the one key element uniting these dark creatures is their universal thirst for the blood of the living. And these vampires have gone on to influence countless works of fiction in the horror and dark fantasy genres, and will no doubt continue to inspire great fear and great imagination. The idea of supernatural creatures that consume the blood of others is nigh universal, often under the umbrella term vampires. When most people hear the term vampires, images of people with strong charismatic traits and an attractive physical appearance belying a predatory nature and razor-sharp teeth begin to materialize. But there is one vampiric creature of Latin American legend that is far from Dracula in both appearance and mannerism. One that looks absolutely alien to this world and has a penchant for attacking animals, both wild and especially domestic. Chupacabra. Descriptions of the chupacabra, or chupacabras, tend to vary from story to story, but most are divided into one of two categories. The first is said to be a large reptilian creature with huge red eyes, greenish-gray, leathery or scaly skin, and a row of spines along its back, perhaps to deter enemies from attacking it from behind. This variation is said to be capable of moving in a quadrupedal fashion, but may also stand upon its hind legs in bipedal fashion, and leap in a locomotion similar to that of a kangaroo. The other is said to be mammalian in appearance, resembling a creature like a wild dog with sparse or no fur, with pronounced eye sockets, canine teeth, and claws. Whatever its appearance, whether it be reptile or mammal, Chupacabra is said to be a frightening figure, prowling rural areas by night and attacking livestock, namely goats and sheep. Though it prefers the blood of animals, Chupacabras are said to be more than capable of attacking nighttime travelers who stumble upon it, or farmers and shepherds tending their herds and flocks after dark. Though vampires as a whole are older than ancient Mesopotamia, stories of chupacabras began in the late 20th century. Chupacabras were first reported in 1995 in Puerto Rico, where they were blamed for attacks on goats, sheep, and other domestic animals, leaving behind carcasses that were uneaten, yet were entirely drained of blood. Alleged witnesses described a creature that stood upright and resembled a reptilian kangaroo with huge red eyes and prominent fangs. though no actual specimens, living or dead, were found. And many skeptics suggested that witnesses may have been influenced by science fiction and horror movies, such as 1995's Species. Other sightings began to be reported throughout the Caribbean, and then in Central and South America, even going as far north as the southwestern United States. A number of explanations for the creatures, both plausible and outlandish, had emerged at the time. Some say that appearances of chupacabra aligned with UFO sightings in the area, indicating the beast was alien in origin. Others say that the chupacabras were a super-secret military experiment gone wrong, and had escaped from a military base. As the legend spread north, chupacabra would gain its more mammalian variant, with alleged witnesses claiming to see what looked like a large feral dog, also with burning red eyes and unearthly fangs. But unlike the reptilian variant, actual specimens of this chupacabra were produced. However, upon closer inspection by biologists, these quote-unquote specimens were identified as coyotes and feral dogs suffering from mange. This disease would have made the wild dogs gradually lose their fur, and other physical defects that would give it a more feral and frightening appearance, especially at night. The mange perhaps would have also led to attacks on livestock, as they would be easier to hunt than their typical prey in the wilds. Whatever their origins may be, and whatever they may look like, chupacabras are unique among the vast sea of cryptids. They are significantly younger than other hidden animals, such as Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, or even Mothman. And their legend combines elements of rural superstition, vampire folklore, and even science fiction. Though chupacabras have had a much shorter history than other vampires and many other cryptids, they have enjoyed a significant stream of popularity beginning in the late 20th century and all the way to the present day. Perhaps it is the thrill of a potentially newly discovered animal species or a real-life monster that has a startling appearance and unnerving way of nourishing itself that led to its widespread legend. Or maybe it is the fun of telling monster stories in the modern age, ones that are somewhat more plausible than the ones of ancient mythology, that keeps the chupacabra story alive and well. Mythology and folklore from the Philippines are rife with fearsome monsters and demons. Among the most famous and most dreadful is the Manananggal. Similar to vampires, the Manananggal roosts during the daylight hours, hidden in isolated places such as jungle canopies or abandoned huts, or even disguised as an ordinary person. But at night, it ventures forth to prey upon human beings, devouring their flesh, blood, organs, and in the case of pregnant women, unborn fetuses. As vicious as any monster of mythology, the Manananggal is as terrifying as it is bizarre. In appearance, the Manananggal resembles a demonic woman with large, bat-like wings, sharp fangs and claws, and a wild black mane. It possesses the strange ability to separate its torso from its lower abdomen and legs, after which it will fly about the region with its entrails trailing behind. Its lower half remains standing and is left vulnerable. As such, the Manananggal will shed its lower half in a hidden area, such as a thick banana tree grove, and return to it before dawn. Philippine mythology gives varying accounts of how a Manananggal is created. One tradition says there is a baby chicken, black in color, living inside the creature. This is passed on from the deathbed of the afflicted to another person, usually a relative. The chick is then believed to reside inside the body of the Manananggal, eating the innards of its host while keeping them alive. The chick is believed to be the cause of a Manananggal's endless hunger, acting parasitic to its host. It is said the transformation into a monster can be stopped if the chick is removed before it matures. This is done by hanging the person upside down, even beating and swinging them violently, until the bird is coughed up. Other traditions say that when a victim survives a Manananggal's attack, the victim will turn into another Manananggal, not unlike the bite of a werewolf. The Manananggal is sometimes referred to as Tik Tik, in reference to the sound it makes while airborne. According to folklore, the fainter the sound, the nearer the Manananggal is. This confuses its prey, granting them a false sense of security before springing their ambush. The Manananggal is a man-eater with a particular fondness for preying on pregnant women. When they find a suitable victim, they will settle on the roof of their house. Using their prehensile tongue that is razor sharp and hollow, they slither down to the sleeping victim, puncture the womb as it proceeds to suck out the fetus, devouring it whole. When hunting men, it seduces them by transforming into a beautiful woman, enticing them into a remote or private place before it eats them alive, being particularly fond of their liver, stomach, and heart. The telltale signs of a Manananggal attack are a mutilated corpse with a deranged facial expression. Though the Manananggal is a formidable foe, it is in fact possible to ward it away from the home, and if need be, to fight and destroy it. To prevent a late-night attack, uncooked rice, ash, or salt spread around the home will deter it from settling on the roof. Manananggal are also said to avoid vinegar, salt, garlic, various spices, and daggers. The tail of a stingray that has been made into a whip is said to be the ideal weapon, should one happen to engage a Manananggal in combat. Failing this, a bamboo spear through its back is just as effective. The most efficient way to kill a Manananggal is to destroy the lower half of its body. Before the sun rises, the Manananggal must return to the rest of its body, or else it will be set ablaze by the rising sun. If the open wound of the dismembered lower half is rubbed with salt, ash, or garlic, the beast would be unable to reattach its torso, rendering it utterly helpless from the inevitable death at dawn. Of all the horrifying, man-eating creatures said to prowl the night, the Manananggal of Philippine mythology ranks as one of the scariest, and certainly one of the most bizarre. Its frightening appearance, unusual ability to self-segment itself from its lower body, and disturbing preference in devouring unborn fetuses make for a truly unique, yet despicable, creature of folklore. When it comes to horror literature and the dark fantasy genre, there is one title that seems to stand out above all others: Dracula. The tale of an ancient and powerful vampire who leaves his homeland to terrorize a new country and becomes embattled with a handful of brave souls who challenge his ever-growing power and bloodlust. The story is a classic among classics. Every vampire of the modern age, and many horror, thriller, and dark fantasy stories for that matter, owe its thanks to the 1897 novel. Along with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Dracula has become one of the most influential and groundbreaking stories in horror fiction, and it was conceived by the mind of Irish author Bram Stoker. Born Abraham Stoker in Dublin, Ireland, November 8, 1847, the man who would go on to create the story of Dracula was a sickly child in his formative years, bedridden with an undisclosed illness, and cared for by his mother, who entertained him by telling him stories of ghosts, vampires, skeletal creatures, and other dark figures. As he grew up and his health improved, Stoker always kept with him a love for the macabre, the dramatic, and dark yet romanticized storytelling. After graduating from Trinity College of Dublin in 1870, Stoker would relocate to London and become the business manager of the West End's Lyceum Theatre, as well as the personal assistant and manager to actor Sir Henry Irving, a man whom Stoker both admired and felt intimidated by. By 1890, Stoker began work on his magnum opus, Dracula, reading obscure texts and anything he could on vampire legends, superstition, and even dark history from all over Europe, as far east as India, and even across the Atlantic to America. He would continue this avid pursuit for several years, taking copious amounts of notes, and writing and rewriting draft after draft before the book was finally published in 1897. Stoker had many influences for his character of Count Dracula, but perhaps the most widely renowned of all was Vlad III, better known as Vlad Tepes, the Impaler, a voivode of Wallachia in modern-day Romania amid the 15th century. While Vlad has been hailed as a national hero in Romania and was renowned for his prowess as a warlord, he had also garnered a lasting reputation for barbaric cruelty toward his enemies, having famously executed thousands by impaling them on stakes. Vlad's father was known as Vlad Dracul. His sobriquet, meaning dragon or devil, gained upon joining the Order of the Dragon, and adding to the family's fearsome reputation. Vlad III himself would go on to be known as the son of the devil, Dracula. Despite popular belief and notable similarities between them, it must be noted that the real-life Dracula and the fictional character were never stated to be one and the same, though many later adaptations make explicit connections between Stoker's Count and the historical figure. However, many scholars believe that one of the strongest inspirations for the character of Count Dracula was in fact Stoker's employer, Henry Irving. According to Stoker's writings, he viewed Irving to be talented as an actor, and also charismatic and cordial, well-traveled and well-read, cultured, sophisticated. Yet he could be cold, arrogant, even manipulative, traits that are all evident within the legendary vampire. Dracula may be the most famous vampire in all of storytelling history, but he is not the first by any means. Every culture on Earth has some form of vampire lurking in their mythology, each one different from the next, yet all possessing a diet of blood from other creatures, namely humans. Stoker's studies exposed him to a great number of vampire and demon legends, a handful of which had a particularly strong hand in creating the infamous Count. From Irish mythology came a being known as Avertak, a cruel and merciless tyrant who came into conflict with a neighboring chieftain, fabled to be the legendary warrior Finn McCool. Avertak was slain by his rival, but he returned from the grave with a hunger for the blood of the living. Slavic mythology told of the Striga, a reanimated corpse that would fly through the night and consume the blood and the entrails of the living, and even shapeshift into the form of an owl. From Hindu mythology comes the Vatala, a demonic spirit that could possess corpses and cause misfortune such as miscarriage and grave illness. But perhaps the vampire legends with the strongest influence on Dracula come from Eastern European folklore, which depicts the Nosferatu as revenants of deceased witches, suicide victims, and people who were wicked in life, possessed by demonic spirits. But they may also be created by being bitten by a vampire, drinking vampiric blood, or any other method of dark magic. They resembled normal people, yet were a hollow shell, a predatory beast void of humanity, driven only by an endless thirst for blood. These monsters were said to possess uncanny strength, preternatural speed, and razor-sharp senses, and would overpower their victims and bite into them with pronounced fang-like canines. They were powerless when confronted with holy symbols such as the cross, biblical scripture, or by the scent of garlic, and they were said to be unable to set foot on hallowed ground or cross running water. Physical contact with holy water, wafers, or relics was said to burn their very flesh like a corrosive acid, and in order to kill them, they had to be beheaded, staked through the heart, or burned, or any combination of the three. Another notable influence on Stoker was the vampire fiction that preceded him. Primary examples include Heinrich August Ossenfelder's Der Vampir, about a vampiric narrator who seduces an innocent maiden; John Polidori's The Vampire, the first prose vampire story published in English, about a mysterious aristocrat who seduces young women and drains their blood before vanishing; and 1872's novella Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, about a young woman who is preyed upon by a female vampire. Having picked and chosen various aspects from various mythological, literary, and historical sources, Stoker wrote his famed novel and gave his titular vampire traits, powers, and weaknesses that would come to define the vampire in Western popular culture forevermore. Dracula lived a mysterious life as a lord and warrior, and later returned from his death and continued on living an undead life sustained through the consumption of human blood. He was almost fully nocturnal, sleeping during the day in a coffin filled with the decrepit soil of his homeland. He was unable to cross running water or enter a home without verbal permission, cast a natural shadow, cast a reflection in mirrors, appear on film, or withstand the presence of garlic, and he was vulnerable to fire, holy relics, and could be killed by decapitation and being stabbed through the heart. But his vampirism also granted him superhuman strength and speed, heightened senses, and powers not common to most vampires of myth or prior fiction, such as hypnotic and telepathic capabilities, limited defiance of gravity, the power to shapeshift into bats, wolves, rats, even mist. And he was also capable of limited power over weather, creating violent storms and summoning winds and dense fog. Though Dracula was not the first vampire from either a mythical or literary standpoint, one could argue that the Count was more powerful than any who had come before him, and perhaps even after him. But Dracula not only re-established the vampire's inherent attributes spoken of in mythology, but their general appearance and disposition as well. Whereas the vampires of Eastern European folklore were mindless and rather animal-like, Count Dracula, was intelligent, charming, with impeccable manners and good breeding, and he was more than capable of showing love, remorse, pleasure, hate, vengeance, and even fear. In many ways, Dracula is the ultimate monster, and yet, he is still very much human at his core. In the novel, Count Dracula seeks to expand his hunting grounds and move out west from Transylvania to London, England. In order to secure his new properties around London, as well as gain a better understanding of English culture and modern society, Dracula enlists freshly appointed English solicitor Jonathan Harker. Jonathan travels from England to Transylvania, feeling more than a fleeting sense of exiting the world he knew and entering a strange and unfamiliar one, made only more unsettling by the locals' superstitious fear of the undead and the alleged curse surrounding Dracula. Upon arriving at Dracula's home, an ancient and decaying castle, Jonathan is greeted cordially by his host, and impressed with the man's hospitality, intelligence, and historical knowledge, detailing horrific scenes of ancient battles past, as if he himself were there to see them. But soon Jonathan gradually gets overwhelmed by an ever-growing sense of dread, and that things are not what they seem to be. What we see here is an old trope in horror storytelling, and monster stories in general, of a monster luring the unsuspecting into their clutches, seen in Slavic stories of Baba Yaga and various grim fairy tales. Events get stranger during Jonathan's stay, as he learns more of Dracula's history and of his true nature, culminating in him being seduced and attacked by 3 gorgeous vampiric women, the brides of Dracula, and saved from death by Dracula himself, who gives his brides a baby to feed upon. Dracula's brides are heavily influenced by an Irish vampire legend, the Darach Dua, the Red Bloodsucker, who appeared as a beautiful young woman that seduces men in a succubus-like fashion, before killing them and drinking their blood. But whereas the Darach Dua is said to be a solitary monster, Stoker multiplied the beautiful terror by 3. Simple, yet effective. Dracula leaves Jonathan behind in the castle, at the mercy of his brides, left to die, and it is only through Herculean effort that Jonathan manages to escape the castle and find refuge at a monastery in Budapest. Meanwhile, Dracula charters a ship called the Demeter to take him and his belongings, most notably many crates of Transylvanian soil, from Romania to England. The ship's voyage, recorded in the captain's log, is a nightmare. Storms come in fast out of nowhere, and the crew is killed off one by one by the vampire aboard. As Dracula feeds on his victims, he gradually gets younger in appearance, going from an ancient-looking man to a handsome and strong man in the prime of his life, likely resembling his state when he had become a vampire originally. The idea of consuming or bathing in blood, both human and animal, in order to gain youth, is found throughout folklore of Eastern Europe. But it is likely that Stoker gained inspiration for this aspect from Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian noblewoman, and one of the many real-life inspirations behind another blood-soaked nightmare, Bloody Mary. Between the years 1590 and 1610, Bathory was accused of vampirism and charged with killing at least 80 girls and young women, having subjected them to sickening torture, sewing their lips shut, beating them with clubs, and burning them with red-hot iron, before bathing in their blood in order to maintain a youthful appearance. The Demeter crashes on the coast of Whitby, England, where Dracula begins his new reign of terror, and where Jonathan Harker's fiancée, Mina Murray, is on holiday with her close friend, the wealthy and beautiful Lucy Westenra. Lucy is the object of desire of three suitors: the aristocratic Arthur Holmwood, Texan Quincy Morris, and Dr. John Seward, and soon becomes the target of Dracula. As Mina gets word of Jonathan's condition in Budapest and leaves at once to be with him, the vampire feeds upon Lucy and begins to turn her into a vampire, condemning her to living death. As the transformation takes hold, Lucy falls gravely ill, in a manner not too dissimilar from the title character in Carmilla, and desperation grows to the point that John is forced to call upon his mentor for aid, the eccentric, yet brilliant, Professor Abraham Van Helsing. In many ways, Van Helsing is very much the heroic force in Stoker's novel, even sharing the author's first name. From a storytelling standpoint, he is the mystical aide who guides the protagonists through their journey, much like the wizard Merlin in Arthurian legend, or the Great One, Tai Genren, from the Chinese tale of Najah. While many characters of this caliber are magical and nearly godlike in intelligence, Van Helsing is very much a human being. He is a renowned surgeon, philosopher, a leading expert on obscure diseases, and is secretly an expert on vampires, demons, and the occult. Upon arrival, Van Helsing does all he can to help the poor woman, offering multiple blood transfusions and using rings of garlic when he suspects the work of a vampire. Sadly, Lucy dies of her illness, but Van Helsing knows it's not over just yet. His instincts prove correct as reports circulate of a woman in white kidnapping children and draining them of their blood. Van Helsing, John, Arthur, and Quincy all go to her tomb one night and discover that she has risen from the grave, has become Nosferatu, a vampire. After a confrontation, the four men succeed in killing her, staking her through the heart, beheading her, and filling her mouth with garlic. Lucy's transformation into a vampire, like much of the story of Dracula, is partly rooted in ancient myths, resembling the classic image of the White Lady ghost of folklore, but was also strongly influenced by vampire hysteria of a more recent time. In the late 1800s, in Exeter, Rhode Island, a case of tuberculosis had stricken the family of Mercy Brown, first claiming the lives of Mercy's mother and older sister in 1884, before Mercy herself succumbed to the illness in January of 1892, at the age of 19. Rumor began to circulate among the townsfolk. The family were no doubt the victims of vampires. Or perhaps one among them was in fact a vampire. After some prodding from the populace, Mercy's father, George Brown, gave permission to exhume the corpses of his wife and daughters on March 17, 1892. Though the first two bodies had decomposed to the point of skeletons, Mercy's was noticeably intact, perhaps due to the winter's cold staving off bacteria and other microorganisms, though that would not have occurred to the superstitious lot of the time. Upon closer inspection from the town's doctor, an autopsy revealed Mercy still had liquid blood within her heart, proving to the townsfolk that Mercy was indeed a vampire, and they burned her heart and her liver. Mercy Brown was not a vampire in reality, but her story spread, with no shortage of supernatural embellishment, and eventually came to the attention of Bram Stoker. Determined to stop Dracula once and for all, Van Helsing rallies Lucy's suitors and the returned Jonathan Harker against the nefarious vampire, using Dr. Seward's asylum as a base of operations. As the hunt begins, Dracula finds a way into the asylum through Seward's patient, the insane R.M. Renfield, who eats flies and spiders and other vermin in an attempt to absorb their life forces, and whom Dracula promises eternal life. Here we see another common element of paranormal stories, where dark figures such as vampires, ghosts, and demons have a unique and utterly terrifying effect upon the mentally ill. In fact, old superstitions in many parts of the world claim that mental illness was the result of a vampire or demon's work. In retaliation for killing Lucy, Dracula attacks Mina, drinking her blood on 3 separate occasions, and having her drink his blood on his final visit, cursing her with vampirism. Upon her death, Mina would be doomed to become a vampire, unless they can find a way to kill Dracula first. With odds raised against them more than ever, Van Helsing's hunting party proceed to raid Carfax Abbey and other properties purchased by the Count, and destroy each of the boxes of earth, placing holy wafers within them, rendering them useless to the vampire. After a brief confrontation with Dracula in his Piccadilly house, they all learn that Dracula is fleeing to his castle in Transylvania with his last box. But all is not lost, as Mina has a faint psychic connection to Dracula, which the party uses to track down the monster. Many times in folklore, a hero winds up having to face down a monster in their lair, even if it means losing an advantage of battlefield selection. In Greek mythology, Heracles, better known as Hercules, cornered the Nemean lion in its own den to gain an advantage over the invulnerable beast, and later defeated Cerberus in the Underworld, as he was left with no other choice. In Beowulf, the titular character fights Grendel's mother, and later on a dragon in their respective lairs, partly out of confidence in his own abilities, and partly to spare innocent casualties. In English folklore, Sir John Lambton fights the dragon known as the Lambton Worm within a fast-flowing river as a means to counter the beast's regenerative abilities. This instance, with Dracula and Van Helsing's party, is no different in nature. The hunters make their way to Romania, and the final battle begins. Van Helsing slays Dracula's brides. Jonathan and the others pursue Dracula's coffin as it rides with Dracula's Romani servants. All the while, Mina's health gradually weakens more and more. After a hard fight between the hunters and Dracula's minions, where Quincy becomes mortally wounded, Jonathan manages to decapitate Dracula, as Quincy stabs him in the heart with his bowie knife before succumbing to his own wounds. Dracula crumbles to dust, freeing Mina from the vampiric curse and ridding the world of its greatest monster. In the years since its publication, Dracula by Bram Stoker has become an essential in not only horror fiction, but English literature as a whole. With its deep themes of good versus evil, science versus magic, humanity, sexuality, madness, and sanity, coupled with its gothic elements, and compelling characters influenced by mythology, folklore, superstition, pre-existing literature, and even history, make the story truly timeless. The character of Count Dracula has become one of the most studied and celebrated villains in all of fiction, changing the way we look at vampires and monsters forever. The story of Dracula has been adapted into stage plays, radio productions, modern literature, comic books, and countless films, with the notorious Count being played by some of the best actors of Hollywood history, including Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, and Gary Oldman. As the quintessential vampire book and horror tale, the story of Dracula has become embedded within popular culture for all time, granting Bram Stoker and his legendary novel a form of everlasting life.